All right, hi everybody. Welcome to writing the college essay. We will get started on that for just a minute. But before we get started, we are just going to take a minute to let those who might need interpretation find us. So if you need interpretation for this meeting, you can join our Zoom link, which is on the website, and I can put that in the chat. And we will have interpreters available for you. And actually, here's the website right here. So if you are an English speaker, we ask that you view it from the YouTube live link. But if you do need interpretation, you can find the website on how to get that at www.beaverton.or.us/SCIW. So I'm going to give just a minute to get that started, and then we will get started on our presentation. All right, I think we will get started right now. I am happy to have Eric Delahoy here to help all of our students writing their college admissions essay, which is a really important part of the college application. It's one of the only places where your voice gets heard. Eric is a private college counselor here in Portland, and his contact information is on this slide. And with that, I'm going to let Eric take it away.
Great, thanks, Tracy. Welcome, everyone. Usually in pre-COVID time, so I'm used to talking to faces. So I imagine you are all looking really good right now and engaged. But thanks for having me. My name again is Eric Delahoy. I'm an independent college counselor, which means I work privately with area high school students and their families and kind of help them navigate this whole college search and application process. I spent many years in college admission at both a large public university and a small private liberal arts college. And my master's degree is actually in creative writing. So this is basically, my hope today is to give you an introduction to the college admission essay, probably do a little bit of myth busting and taking care of some misconceptions, and hopefully just giving you some tools to approach this as you write your application essays. So let's go to the next slide, please. All right, so basically what we're going to talk about first is a little bit of a review of the application components themselves, because looking at those and looking at what makes a complete application will help you understand where your essay fits in to that particular grouping of items. And we will also then be able to understand what the purpose of the college admission essay is. We'll also talk about how to choose a topic. I'll give you some examples of topics I've seen over the years, and then we'll kind of wrap it up with some writing tips, some things that you certainly have heard during your English and history classes, but definitely tips that are well worth repeating as you begin to write your essays. And then we should have plenty of time for questions at the end as well. So thanks again for joining us, and we can continue. All right, so I feel like no college essay presentation would be complete without actually starting with the application itself, because this helps you understand again where the essay fits into the whole application process, and often will help you to figure out how to approach topics, those particulars. So a lot of you hopefully are doing this now. You're filling out your applications. First really big deadline is just around the corner, November 1st. I'm going to talk specifically about the common application, but know that Whether it's a school-specific application or it's the coalition application or the University of California application, the applications pretty much ask you for the same information. And the application itself is really mostly demographics, where you live, which school do you attend, what do your parents do you have any siblings, those pieces. But it also includes a listing of up to 10 of your activities, at least on the common application, where you can talk about, sports you've been involved with, extracurricular, clubs, leadership, volunteer experience, jobs, those particular things. And it gives you a little bit of a space to talk about your activities, but only about 40 words or so. So you can't really go into a whole lot of detail there. And then there's a space for up to 5 awards and honors on the application. That could be anything from being on honor roll to being in the National Honor Society, maybe getting a science fair award or a scholastic art award. Those are the kinds of things that would go in there. Now, once you've completed that part of the application, there are still other items that have to go in to actually complete the full application itself. And the first of those is your high school transcript. And your high school transcript is more than just your GPA. Kind of think of it as an academic roadmap of what you've done throughout your high school years. And colleges will look at that transcript beyond, like I said, just the GPA. They're going to take a look at how challenging you've made your course selection, your success within that challenge. In fact, when your counselor puts together a recommendation and a school report, they'll actually make an assessment of your rigor in comparison to your peers. So rigor would be, are you taking any AP or IB courses, any dual credit? But please don't misread that as saying that everyone must take a whole bunch of AP and IB classes to choose a rigorous curriculum for themselves. What's going to challenge you and what's not, or what's going to be too challenging. So balance is important. But colleges will look at that piece of it and success within that curriculum, but they're also going to look at grades in particular subject areas, especially when you're thinking about particular majors. So for example, if you want to be a nurse, they're going to look more heavily at those math and science grades. On the other hand, if you're thinking about becoming an attorney, going into pre-law, something of that nature, it'll look a little bit more heavily at those social science classes and English classes. So know that it's really different per student and per major as to how colleges look at those transcripts. They'll also look at your trending grades. Maybe you started off slowly that freshman year, which is not all that atypical, and then continued to improve. That's always a good thing. Maybe you've been really consistent throughout, always good too. Maybe you're doing really, really well and you turn 16 and whoops, got your driver's license and kind of fell off for a little bit, had to come back up. They will see that too. So remember, it tells a story, not just your GPA, but tells a story of everything that went into it. Then some of you will probably submit test scores this year. Many of you probably will not. One of the things that we've, found with COVID is that testing has been really tough for students to be able to find a place to do so. And so most colleges and universities have gone test optional if you choose to do so. If you do have test scores that you're sending in, of course, they will be part of that component. But if you go test optional, know that that's not going to hurt you in the process. And then you have 1 to 3 letters of recommendation. One comes from your high school counselor or an academic official at your school. And that really is includes a recommendation, but mostly is what we call a school report. And that's so your your colleges understand kind of your academic context. A lot of your counselors will submit what's called a school report, and that will have, how many students are engaged in AP or IB work, how many students are going to 2- and 4-year colleges and universities, which colleges and universities they're going to, so they can get a little bit of an idea of what your school life has been like. And then you have 1 to 2 recommendations from junior or senior year teachers in core subject areas. So that would be math, science, social studies, English, and foreign language. If you are majoring in something like performing art, like theater or music or visual arts, a teacher in one of those areas would also be considered to be a core teacher. So, next slide, please. So if you think about it, if you put kind of to magically, you're going to hover over all of those different pieces and understand what the colleges get, you get a little bit of idea of what they know about you just based on the application. You know, they know a little bit about, again, your demographic background, where you're from. They'll make an assessment in terms of the rigor of the school that you attend. So that comes into play. They'll know those activities you've engaged with. And same thing, your grades. At that point, your grades are right now what they are. It's not like you can go back and change them. I mean, I suppose if you were a really good hacker, you could hack into your school system and change them that way. But if you get caught, you're going to an entirely different kind of institution than college. So I would not recommend doing that. And again, test scores are what they are at this point, if you choose to submit them. And then you have those letters of recommendation, which is where everybody else is saying something about you. So if you think about all these pieces and you look at it as a whole, you have to begin to ask yourself, and next slide, please, what's missing here? So next slide. Really, honestly, what you want to say about yourself. And that's what the essay allows you to do. It allows you to fill in the gaps, expand on information in your application, but really to provide the colleges information about yourself that is not already obvious within the application. Next slide. All right, so what is the purpose of the essay? It is quite literally a written introduction to somebody new. If you think about it this way, let's say, something happened over the weekend that you want to share with your friends. You might get on FaceTime, or you might, chat over text, something like that, but you're going to kind of share with them what happened to you. And that's what you're doing with this essay. You're actually just providing an introduction to somebody new, something that, again, encapsulates who you are. And that person, of course, new person, is that admission counselor who's reading your application. You can also think of this as an opportunity to provide information about yourself, again, that's not obvious in the application. And really what you want to think about is that in the essay, colleges want to know who you are beyond those measurable things like grades and test scores. They want to know who they're going to get on campus next fall, how you might be engaging in campus, what kind of student you're going to be, what kind of community member that you will be as well. Your essay is not the place to repeat all the information that's already in your application. Colleges have that, and you want to go ahead and just trust that they're reading the application itself. So think about it again as an opportunity to provide that new information to help them see who you are beyond those grades and test scores. The final thing I will say, even though I'm going to call this an essay because I've been doing this a very long time and it's just ingrained, in my vernacular. But when you're thinking about this, don't think of this as an essay, as an opportunity to sell yourself. A lot of times you'll get that in books you read, like how can I represent myself the most? How can I market myself in my essay? And really, that's not how you want to approach this. Honestly, if you only remember one thing in this presentation today, I want you to remember this. You absolutely have nothing to prove to the colleges in your essay. All of the proof as to whether or not you're ready for the level of curriculum that they have already resides in the other parts of your application. And so the essay itself actually ends up being an opportunity for you to just present yourself beyond those grades, beyond those scores. So don't think about selling yourself, think about being yourself within this. Next slide, please. All right, so what the essay is not, we're all used to, I think probably since we were probably maybe in fourth grade or so when we started writing more complicated, paragraphs and essays, we were taught this 5-paragraph model. That's the introductory paragraph, that catches the reader's attention. It ends with a thesis, usually 3 points in that thesis. And then there are 3 paragraphs where you discuss and analyze, and that's really 1 paragraph per thesis point. And then you wrap it up in a tidy little conclusion at the end. That's an English essay. That is an argumentative essay. That's an essay you'd write for your history class. That's not what this essay is. Remember, you're not selling yourself and you're not academically proving why you should be at that college or university. Instead, think of this as more of a personal narrative, or honestly, an exercise in storytelling. What is the story about yourself you want to share with the colleges and universities? And as I mentioned earlier, it's just a conversation that you are putting on paper, or an introduction on paper to that admission person. So, Next slide, please. So here are some essay basics. I'm going off of the Common application, although these are pretty similar for the Coalition application as well. But this is not a long piece of writing, as you'll see here. This is only 250 to 650 words, which equals about 1.5 to 2 pages double spaced. That's not a lot of time, and it's not a lot of space, and it's also not the place to try to tell your life story. Even if you had the most boring life on the planet, you would still be able to fill more than 3 or 4 pages with your writing. So think of this instead as kind of like opening the window to or taking a snapshot of your life. Give them a sense of who you are through some kind of experience that you've had, and then they can kind of extrapolate from there and get some ideas. Topic wise, the Common application, Coalition applications, they give you several essay prompts. I'm going to admit to you that I don't know what any of them are or how many there are, because I just encourage my students to go directly to the bottom one, which is topic of your choice. Why? Because I feel if you choose topic of your choice, you're going to choose something that matters to you, something that you enjoy, and something that would be easy to write about and also would represent you. If you start, what I've found is if you start responding to prompts, then that essay starts to sound more academic again. So think about, again, storytelling, write whatever you want to write. The bottom line, though, is that you have to think of this as a very personal, introspective piece of writing. How are you going to help them get to know you a little bit better? Next slide, please. All right. So how do you choose your topic? Well, number one, I kind of alluded to this earlier, choose something that you'd enjoy writing about. If you choose something that you would like to write about, number one, you know that subject really well. So it'll be pretty easy to put that essay together and come up with examples. The second, if it's something you'd enjoy writing about, obviously it's going to be easier to write about, and your writing is going to kind of pop and be fresher and more personalized, which makes it easier for the reader to connect with your experience. Other things to think about. Is there an experience that you've had that's maybe unique to you or has caused you to grow in some kind of way? Maybe there is a talent that you have or a skill that you have that is pretty unique to you. Maybe, how I mentioned earlier about the activities in the Common application, you only have a few words to talk about those. Some of you may have an activity that has been really meaningful to you over the years, and you can actually use your essay to expand upon that activity. That is totally fine, especially if you feel like you need to give a lot more information. You grew a lot from that, you learned a lot. That's a great place to go for a potential essay topic. Maybe there's also something that you can do that not many other people can do from there. Maybe perhaps there's a struggle that you've had to overcome. Maybe you worked really, really hard to achieve a goal and you fell short. Actually, essays about not achieving that goal are usually pretty good, because we typically learn more from failure than we do from our successes. But maybe you could also talk about a success that you've had and how it felt to work so hard and then basically achieve that goal. Maybe there's a personal dilemma that you've had, a decision that you had to make. Those actually make really fantastic essays, because they get to the bottom of, how you make decisions, but also kind of your character. For example, one year I had a student write his essay about having to turn his best friend in who was cheating on the test next to him. That's a pretty, ripe essay for getting to the bottom of what a student or who a student is. You might even have a belief or a worldview that's core to you, and that's totally fine as well. Because if you choose something that that's really core, that you really care about, again, it kind of goes up into that idea of the topic you enjoy writing about. You'll know it really well. You'll be able to back it up with a lot of details and specific information, and it will say a lot about you. All right. I always find it's super helpful to give examples to students of essays that I've seen over the years, to kind of give you some ideas of where your essay might come from. Usually if I'm in a room, I'll ask everyone to raise their hands if they know what the word game boggle is. I'm going to assume that some folks in here don't know it, so I'll explain it. But one of my very first students I worked with wrote about her boggle strategy. And the word game boggle, you can kind of see on here what it's about. It has a bunch of dice. Each die has a letter on each side of that die. You shake it up, it lands. You have an egg timer that has It's like 3 minutes. And in that 3 minutes, you have to come up with as many words as possible. The person at the end of that 3 minutes who has the most words wins, right? It's pretty straightforward. Now, people like me, get stuck, almost English majors get stuck looking for the most impressive words versus just, following the object of the game. So we lose all the time. But her strategy was that she, memorized 2 and 3 letter words in the dictionary. And so she won all the time. And then she started the Boggle Club at her high school. There were like 4 or 5 members. She was the president, 3 years running. But you can tell a lot about her just based on this topic, right? She loves words, she loves to read, those pieces. And so it gives you some insight into what she's all about. Really funny story about her is that when she was deciding between her final 2 colleges, she went to something called accepted student programs. And hopefully, seniors, you're going to have these opportunities later in the spring. But colleges will host you on campus with an accepted student program so you can get a much better idea of what it's like to be a student there. There's usually an overnight stay. So she was at Hampshire College, the second on her stop. And Hampshire's a really interesting school. It doesn't have any grades. You come up with your own path of study. It's kind of like graduate school before graduate school. But anyway, she was sitting in the audience waiting for her for the speaker to begin. Another young woman sits down next to her, pulls out Pocket Boggle, and asks if she knows how to play. Well, where do you think she ended up going to college? Now, I'm not going to lie to you and say that your essay topic is going to answer the question of where you're going to go to college. But I will say that a few years ago, when students were struggling with decisions about where to go, we brought out their essay again and read it together. And for those students who spent time on their essays, remember, personal introspective piece of writing, a lot of characteristics kind of bubbled to the top, and we were able to kind of match those characteristics with some of the schools they were deciding between. Another of my students was a great listener. She was the person that all our friends went to for advice, to hold their confidences or secrets, to provide a shoulder to cry on if they needed it. Hopefully we all have, a couple friends in our lives like that. And so she, decided, one of her best gifts is that she's a great listener and people trust her. And so she thought she might want to go into psychiatry later on. So she wrote her essay about, how her skill set might lead to that. She didn't end up going into psychiatry, but she did work for our Senator Ron Wyden for a few years. And obviously, when you have constituents coming into the senator's office, you have to have really great listening skills to be able to convey, what they're seeking in terms of that help. Another of my students came to me 3 days before essays and applications were due. I do not recommend any of you wait that long to do this. In fact, I don't even take students that late anymore because it's way too stressful for everyone involved. On the other hand, we were trying to come up with essay topics and not really getting anywhere. But then I noticed that her thumb was bandaged up. So I asked her what had happened, and she's like, oh, no, it's kind of stupid. And I said, no, just tell me. And she said, well, last night I ran a sewing machine needle through it. Ouch. And I said, well, what were you sewing? And she's like, no, it's dumb. I said, just tell me. And she said, well, I take old used jeans and I make giant stuffed animals out of them. And then before school starts, I stuff them in my friend's locker to pop out and surprise them when they open them up. Well, duh, that's a pretty good topic for an essay, right? I would bet that nobody in, who's logged on today does that. And so it actually was a really fantastic, topic. She went on to write about a giant squid that she was making out of acid wash jeans. If you don't know what acid wash jeans are, you can ask your parents or you can Google it. Probably one of the very worst fashion trends to come out of the late 80s, early 90s. I do understand that it's coming back, but students, you have the power to stop this, so please do that. But in any case, when you think about this particular topic, you can also tell a lot about that student. Not only is she super creative and likes to, get engaged in making crafts, but she also cares about her relationships that much that she would spend that amount of time doing so. Another of my students wrote about making origami cranes. And she was a student who struggled with some ADHD. And when she was in the classroom, she would fold origami cranes, which would help her be able to stay focused on the lecture that was going on. And she really began to love origami. So she started I forget what the name of the legend is, but she started to read about legends and history of origami, and she came across this legend of a young woman who had the legend was if she made 1,000 paper cranes and strung them together, that she would be able to cure, any illness that she had. And as it turned out, the author of this essay, her aunt was diagnosed with liver cancer right before she started her essay. And so she decided to fold 1,000 cranes with her aunt, and they did 1,000, and wouldn't you know, but her cancer went into remission. So kind of that whole story came full circle. It had a really personalized approach to it. Next slide, please. I had a student who used to babysit two really rambunctious twin boys. They were like 3 or 4 years old, and she would get them to bed. She'd be exhausted, and she would collapse on this big red couch in the house where she babysat. And then when she was on this big red couch, she would kind of decompress and plan out, the goals for her life. So she talked about, the solace of the big red couch. Very funny story. Several years later, I actually ended up working with those two twin boys who had that other student as their babysitter. Let's see, another one. I had a student who grew up in a crack house early in her life, and she wrote her essay about waking up in the morning, setting her alarm, age 5, making her lunch for the day, getting that packed, getting on a city bus to go across town to kindergarten, and all at age 5. And luckily for her, her aunt and uncle in Portland were able to gain custody of her. And so she was, taken out of that difficult situation. But she wrote her essay about, making her breakfast or making her lunch that morning. And then what she went on to do was discuss how she spent the rest of, her years really trying to figure out how to learn to trust the adults in her life again. No matter which topic you select, I think a good essay will teach you something about yourself. It may not be that all important question, why are we here on this planet? What's my purpose? It could be, but oftentimes it'll just shed a different kind of light or some different perspective on some experiences that you've had. Because remember, and this is the last time I'm going to say this, it's a very personal, introspective piece of writing. So this next topic definitely, I think, illustrates that. I worked with a student who was so tall, he had to duck to come through my office door. In fact, he was so tall, even when he sat in my computer chair and I stood next to him, he was taller than me. It was kind of depressing. And I'm not short, I'm average height, but still, he was still taller. We were kind of not getting anywhere with essay topics. And finally, I just asked him, well, what is something that you can do that not many other people can do? And he said, well, Eric, that's so easy. I can slam dunk basketballs. Because he could easily do that. Honestly, he probably just had to stand on his tiptoes and he could have done it. He was that tall. So I said, well, great. Well, why don't you go home and just start writing about the different dunks that you do and see where that takes you. So he goes home, he comes back a couple weeks later, he sits down across from me and says, Eric, I don't think this is about slam dunking basketballs anymore. I said, well, yeah, probably not. What's it about? He said, well, 3 years ago, when my mom died, I took it all to the basketball court. All of my grief, my frustration, my anger, my fear, my sadness, the uncertainty, all of it I took to the basketball court and I dunked it away. Dunk after dunk after dunk. And I got really good at it. And then a year later, when I moved to Portland, I realized that if I went to the basketball court, the playground, being the shy guy that I am, if I would just start dunking basketballs, everyone would come over and want to know who I was. So it was a way for me to break the ice socially. But until he actually had written about those dunks and thought about where they came from and where they've taken him, he hadn't really put those things together. So it ended up, again, teaching him something about himself. Now, the topics that I've just given you, maybe aside from the crack house story and the slam dunk essay, none of those topics probably feel like something like, oh, this is a topic that the colleges are going to love and think is so brilliant, they're not even going to read this essay and they're just going to accept me. That doesn't happen. And honestly, the colleges don't care which topics you select. What's important, though, is that all these topics that I've shared with you were important to the students who wrote them, and allowed them to get themselves and their personalities onto that page. Because if you think about it, you are the subject of your essay. The topic is just the catalyst that gets you there and helps you to share with those colleges who you are beyond, again, those grades and those test scores. Next slide, please. All right, so some helpful writing tips. Writing in your voice is important. This has to sound like you. Students, colleges know that you are 17 years old, 18 years old writing these essays. They are not expecting some master's level, literature student writing these. They really just want to know that you can tell a story and articulate a little bit about who you are. So make sure this sounds like you. The other thing that's really important is, remember, this is a short piece of writing again, 1.5 to 2 pages. You just don't have all this space to get started. You really have to kind of start in the middle of the action to grab your reader's attention. So let's say I'm going to write my essay about climbing Mount Hood, which I would never do because I hate high exposed places, especially when wind is involved. But it's a good example for this particular topic. I'm not going to start back in 4th grade when I discovered this National Geographic special about climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. And then I got so hooked that I watched all these other National Geographic specials. And then I was really excited about climbing. So I made a big paper mache mountain for my Star Wars action figures to climb up. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll convince my parents to get me some really great hiking boots. And then I'll get in better shape. And then I'm going to practice by climbing Mount Tabor. You are so bored with me right now because none of that actually matters. Instead, if I'm an effective writer, I'm going to actually take my reader with me to the top of that mountain right away. Maybe I'm taking that final step, maybe I'm already up there. But I want them to experience that moment with me. And so maybe it's so beautiful, so clear out that I can see my house from the top of Mount Hood. Maybe it's just me and the mountaintop above this, big blanket of fog below us or clouds, and it's super peaceful. Or maybe it's really stormy and the wind is whipping, the strings on my hoodie and slashing my face. Whatever it is, if you get that reader in the moment with you, they're going to stay with you for the whole essay. Maybe you have to back up and give that, hike context. Like maybe I did hike Mount Hood to conquer my fear of heights, or maybe I found my grandfather's journal a few years before and I'm taking the same route he took 50 years ago to the day. That would be a really interesting essay. But in any case, you want to grab their attention, because the sad fact is that colleges are only spending 1 to 3 minutes reading your essay. You want the full 3-minute read, not a 1-minute scan. And so again, getting their attention is important. So those first paragraphs, first lines are really important. Now, I don't want you to log off after this and stare at your computer screen waiting for that magical first line to appear. Just write and it will magically show up somewhere else in your essay. When I'm reviewing student essays, 9 times out of 10, their first line will show up somewhere else in that essay, usually in the final paragraph. And then you can move that to the beginning of your essay, but don't worry about that. My favorite first line ever comes from a student several years ago who spent her junior year of high school on an exchange in Brazil. So she lived with a host family. She had been with them for about 2.5 months, long enough to where she was starting to understand Portuguese, which was the native language being spoken in the home. And what she would do is she would excuse herself early from dinner to go upstairs to work on her homework, if that's what she would say. But instead, she would perch on the staircase outside of the dining room and listen into her host family's conversation. She said it was to learn language. The more we talked, the more we agreed that she was being nosy. And it's actually a good thing she was being nosy, because in those conversations she was listening to, she very quickly figured out that her host family thought she was there to marry their oldest son. Not what you want to learn when you are 16 years old, thousands of miles away from home. So she wrote her essay about, packing her bags up in the middle of the night, literally shimmying down a drain pipe from the second-story window, finding her way through this not so safe, area of town, and finding the coordinator of the program and being reassigned. But her first line I will never forget was, when I was 16 years old, I was engaged to be married for a short period of time. We're all going to want to read on after that, right? Because we're all nosy. We want to know what happens next. So do spend time in getting that reader's attention. A few more tips. Less is more. You know this. You don't want to over describe something. because it's just a short piece of writing. So you need to make sure that your words count. Description is definitely important, but don't call something a giant orange orb of happiness resting its chin on the fuzzy green horizon. Just call it a sunset. That still elicits exactly the same kind of visual response from there. So editing yourself so you're not overstating things or repeating your ideas is important. Being specific and using details as well. This is probably where I provide most feedback to my students, is that asking them more questions. What did it feel like to have to turn your friend in for cheating? Or what was it like to work so hard over the summer only to be cut from that, volleyball team? Always trying to think of those details, right? I remember a few years ago, I was asking similar questions of one of my students, and halfway through, he grabs his head like this and he goes, ah, and I'm like, what happened? He's like, you sound just like my mom. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? And he said, well, she's always asking me, telling me to go into the caverns, go below the surface of what I'm saying. And that's exactly what you want to do with your essay. I told him that his mom was absolutely right. And also that I was going to use that quote for every essay presentation I do in the rest of my life. But go below the surface, make sure the colleges know what was going on with you, what was at stake, what you were feeling, thinking, what you were dealing with. And then finally, don't use $100 words. This is not the place to impress the colleges with your vocabulary. Write like you would normally speak. Remember, because this is a story, not an academic essay. There's nothing worse, I think, than reading a great essay in a student's voice and you can tell exactly when the thesaurus came out. So I was baking my cookies with my grandmother one Sunday afternoon, and it was very serendipitous that now, there are probably half a dozen students at your school that use the word serendipitous in their everyday language. And if you know one of those students, or you are one of those students, that's wonderful. And you should use the word serendipitous in your essay because that's how you usually talk. However, if you don't use that word, don't force it in there. Remember, you're not proving to the colleges that you're smart. You're giving them an idea of who you are beyond all of that stuff. And then finally, just avoid things like slang, derogatory words, deeply personal writing. And when I say deeply personal writing, this is about, talking about things that are happening, with you and your significant other, or personal habits that you might have that no one needs to know about. But things like struggling with maybe like a mental health issue, like I've had some of my students write about eating disorders in the past, that's totally fine, because that's really talking about struggles that you've had and then where you're at now, like how you've worked through. That's okay. That's not too personal. It's more about habits and activities you might be engaging with that maybe not everyone needs to know about. Also, you want to steer clear of judgmental writing. Now, I don't think it's bad to write about something that's controversial because, of course, you know that really well. And as long as you're not writing judgmentally about people who might disagree with you, then you're fine. That's okay. And then finally, titles, you don't need them. Colleges don't want titles, so don't spend any time thinking about those whatsoever because colleges don't care and they often sound gimmicky. So I've gone very fast, but now we have plenty of time for questions that you might have. And so I'm not sure how we're doing that, if we're going into the chat for that.
Yes.
Or okay, great.
I've got to stop the screen share because
Okay.
I have to be able to see the YouTube. So if you have questions, hold on. If you have questions, you can, okay. We have just a couple. So on the Common App, the honors section is separate from making honors in a given class. Is this correct? Do you want to talk about the difference between the honors and honors section on the Common App? And
yeah, the honors section is more of like an award that you've received or a designation you've received. Like you might be, for example, National Merit semifinalist, or you might be an AP scholar, or it could be, again, a science fair award, something like that. That would go in the honors section. If a class is designated as an honors class, there's a different place where you actually put that into, it's the Well, there are two places depending on the schools you're applying to. One is under the education section, which asks for your senior year courses, and then they have a designation and a pull down menu that will say AP or IB or dual credit or honors advanced, that kind of stuff. So that's where you would do that, but you're not going to put that you were in honors biology under the honors designation section from there. So hopefully that clears that up.
Okay. Are there essay topics you'd avoid due to overuse?
You know, some people will tell you that, but I really think it has more to do with how you tell the story than what the topic itself is. You know, you always have a different experience or perspective. You know, for example, like one of the topics that people tell you not to write about is, you know, a mission trip that you might have. You know, and if you write about that in a very cliche way, like, you know, I went to help less fortunate people and I couldn't believe how happy everyone was there despite the fact they didn't have anything. And then I helped out and built a house, came back and felt really good about myself, but I was happy to have my, you know, hair dryer when I got home. Well, not only is that very cliche, it's very shallow and actually offensive, right? That's not what you want to write. On the other hand, I did have a student who wrote a really fantastic essay about a Mexico mission trip that she had. And she basically, so she actually had taken 3 trips to this particular village. So she was very involved, you know, with the village and had done a lot of great things and made some connections. But she took the approach of starting her essay with, so the backstory is she and her group of volunteers managed to clog the only working toilet in the entire village. And so she starts her essay with, how do you say plunger in Spanish? You know, those of you who are taking a Spanish class probably don't know how to say that either because it's not part of what you learn, right? And so she told this pretty funny story of all the charades she was doing and trying to communicate to get what she needed to fix the situation. So it was a really engaging, you know, kind of story, and she told it very well. And then she went on to talk about how that story just really demonstrated to her how important, number one, that knowing other languages is. But also that it was important to her that she, even though she didn't have all of the right words, that she still tried to communicate. And so it ended up saying a lot about her. So she wrote a really great essay. She came back to me after talking to an English teacher, and this is not, you know, saying anything negative about English teachers. I love English teachers. But the English teacher had said, you know, well, you can't write about a Mexico mission trip essay because it's cliche. And so she came back and was in tears, and she said, you know, and I just said, well, do you like your essay? And she's like, I love my essay. I said, well, so do I. So why don't you just send it in and see what happens? That year, 5 out of 6 of the colleges, when she got her acceptance letters, had a handwritten note thanking her for the best laugh they had had all season. So it's all about how you approach writing it than steering clear of a particular topic.
That's very good. Thank you. So when is just like, when might this all be due? And so you can talk about that. I can talk about that.
Sure. I'm happy to. You know, some of these are, you know, if you're applying early decision or early action, they're due, well, a couple were due October 15th, but most early schools are November 1 or November 15th from there. So they're coming up quickly. There also are other things. So early decision means you apply to one school only under something called early decision. And what that means is that if you are accepted, you actually go there. So you're actually deciding where you're going to go almost a year beforehand. I'm not a big fan of early decision because, number one, most students I know change their minds. But number two, it's really hard to do that right now because most of you have not been able to visit your colleges and know for sure if they're a really good fit. And the other one is you need to make sure you know that school is financially feasible. Early action, you apply the same time frame, but you can apply to multiple schools early action, and you still have until May 1st to decide where you're going to go to school, so you're not locked in. So again, those dates I already gave to you. And then you have what's called rolling admission, which means decisions are just constantly being made once your application is complete. So that really doesn't technically have a deadline, although you don't want to wait until like July 1st to send it in. And then regular decision is usually January 1, January 15th.
All right. If I'm choosing prompt 1, which is asking if there is a talent or a part of a student's identity that can be elaborated on, would you have some suggestions on how that might be structured?
Well, I mean, the way I always, kind of advise students is to start with a story. Always start with a story that, grabs your reader's attention and then keeps you in there. And then you can go into the discussion pieces later. There's a good essay does three things. It tells a story, right? The story is always in the past, right? It brings it into, you have this discussion, which is kind of into your present. And then you kind of look toward the future a little bit. So that's how you want to structure an essay from there. So start with that, particular experience you've had. Tell a story. It doesn't have to be funny. It can just be, matter of fact as well. But tell that story and then talk about, what did you learn in this? Why was it an important experience that you had? What were the challenges that you faced within that? And then how has that, prepared you to meet next steps? Or, what have you learned overall from everything? That's the best way to approach an essay like that.
Perfect. Thank you. And then I think we've kind of gone over this, but just to reiterate, is there a format like MLA, or is it more free form for the essay?
It's more free form. There really aren't any rules here other than, spell and write, complete sentences, those pieces. But because this is a more creative, piece of writing, you have a lot more liberty in how you do that. Also, I should mention, you're taught not to use I and me in your essays. You can use I and me in this essay. In fact, you should, because it is all about you from there. So there aren't a lot of hard and fast rules other than, make sure that you, give yourself plenty of time to review and revise and edit and make sure it sounds like yourself. A really good tip that I forgot to mention, especially in coming up with voice, is reading your essay out loud to yourself. Make sure it sounds, that's where you could find some of those, missing pieces. Make sure it sounds like you from there. But also, even if you struggle like writing an essay, sometimes I'll have my students actually tell a story into their phone and record it, and then start from there and start writing it. So there's so many ways to approach this if you're having difficulty.
Very good. I love that. And I think I think I got all of the questions. If you have any more, you can put them into the chat in YouTube now. But I think that we are coming to the end. Eric, that was so helpful.
Oh, thank you.
I've been doing this for a really long time, and I learned quite a few things in this presentation. So thank you so much. And I will put up, let me put up your, let me go back and put up your contact information one more time. Hold on. Okay, so that is Eric's contact information if anybody is looking for some more individual counseling on these things. And just thank you so much for all your help with this.
All right, you bet. Good luck, everyone. I mean, I think the big thing is just write about you. The bottom line is this whole process is about authenticity. Be yourself. Know what works for you in the colleges. Don't get just sucked in because of a name of a school. Think about why it fits for you, and then also present yourself in your essay. You're not going to go wrong. So wish you all the very best and have a great rest of the week, whatever day of the week it is. We just don't know anymore.
Exactly. All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Okay, let me